Hi. So in my last video about purgatory, I had a lady in the comment section ask me to do a video about orthodoxy, and I've been meaning to actually. If you spend much time online in Catholic pages and traditionalist Catholic circles, you'll notice that there's a lot of people who are attracted to orthodoxy, and a lot of Orthodox people on those pages telling them why that's such a great idea. And I myself, when I was learning about traditional sacramental apostolic Christianity, was attracted to orthodoxy for a couple of years as well. It's understandable. Let's not mince words. In the Catholic Church, there's today a lot of modernism and liberalism going on that is very concerning for a lot of people. So why did I ultimately become Catholic and not Orthodox then? Well, it's because ultimately the Pope, and let me explain. For 1,000 years after Pentecost, the church was united east and west, and there was one church, one truly holy Catholic and apostolic church. This is the church that produced the Nicene Creed, and where we get that phrase. And the reason why it's split, now it's often pointed to the issue of the filioque, which I'll get into, but the reason why it's split in 1054, from my reading, and if you really look at the history, I think you can bear this out, is that there were Roman imperial politics that carried over into church politics. During the, I believe it was the 400s, the politics of the Roman Empire were split into east and west. Constantine built his great city on Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, and had that be the capital of the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and then Rome remained the capital for the western half. So there were effectively two emperors at that point. So what that turned into was, obviously Rome became a dual society in many ways. So when the church spread and took over the entire empire, it also sort of became a dual church in a lot of ways. So it didn't just happen overnight. There's a lot leading up to it, but really, I think the reason why ultimately it split is the churches in the East just didn't like being under the rule of Rome anymore. They were just sort of bristling under that, and it was because of the Roman imperial politics that it didn't carry it into the church. Now, they'll point to the filioque, which basically, in the original Nicene Creed Greek, it says the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father, right? And then I forget which pope it was, but later on, centuries later, one of the popes changed it to the Father and the Son, saying that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. So just got a little more specific. And basically the East said, well, that's overreaching. You don't have the authority to change the language of the Nicene Creed, and you should have held another council, and therefore we're going to split. And then the schism happened. Obviously, that's a gross oversimplification. That's basically the filioque controversy. So it's almost an argument over semantics at that point. And really, if you look leading up to that point, there are plenty of Eastern bishops and saints and fathers who recognize that the Pope did have authority over the church. And to say that he didn't have the authority to specify a little bit in the language of the Nicene Creed is a stretch, which is why I think it had more to do with politics. So just to support the idea that the theologians, a lot of theologians and saints in the East, and saints that the Eastern Orthodox look to even today, supported the primacy of the Pope, I'll just read a few quotes here, and I'll put some links in the video as well. Sergius, who's the Metropolitan of Cyprus in 649, wrote a letter to Pope Theodore and said, "O holy head, Christ our God hath destined thy apostolic see to be an immovable foundation and a pillar of the faith. For thou art, as the divine word truly saith, Peter, and on thee as a foundation stone have the pillars of the church been fixed." So obviously, in the 600s in the East, Major Metropolitan of Cyprus wrote to Peter and said, "You're the foundation of the church." Wrote to Pope Theodore as the successor of Peter. So we can see in the East, it was believed and held then. And then, of course, we have St. Macarius of Egypt in 371, an Eastern saint. Moses was succeeded by Peter, who had committed to his hands the new church of Christ and the true priesthood. again, the primacy of Peter. We have St. Peter, the Bishop of Alexandria, 306. Peter was set above the apostles, wrote that in one of his canons. And then we have St. Chrysostom, St. John Chrysostom, who's, like the mega church father for the East. He writes, Peter himself, the head or crown of the apostles, the first in the church, the friend of Christ, who received a revelation not from man, but from the Father, as the Lord bears witness to him, saying, Blessed art thou, this very Peter, and when I name Peter, I name that unbroken rock, that firm foundation, the great apostle, first of the disciples, the first called, the first who obeyed he was guilty, even denying the Lord. So obviously, St. John Chrysostom recognized that Peter was set above the other apostles and was given the papacy. So there's plenty of other quotes, and I'll link this page. It's from fisheaters.com to show that the East, before the Great Schism, held to the primacy of Peter. And then just switch over here to an article by Jimmy Akin. He sums it up nicely. He was considering becoming Orthodox as well as he was coming into the church. And looking at all the evidence, he said, which of the following is easier to accept? Church A is the true Church of Christ, despite being a small, ethnically limited, and internally fractured communion that does not possess the admittedly divine institution of the papacy, which would be the Orthodox. Or Church B is a schismatic church, despite it being far larger, having evangelized far more cultures, not having internal full communion problems, and having the institution of the papacy. Logically, I would go with the second one. Church B is the true Church of Christ, and its just mentioned characteristics are signs of God's providential guidance, while Church A is the body in schism. So I would go with, obviously, Jimmy's logic here. And just a final paragraph. It seemed to me that it was easier to explain matters if one accepted the second possibility. The Catholic Church is the bride of Christ, and the Orthodox are, regrettably, in schism at present. It would be much harder to maintain that the Catholic Church is a false superchurch that dwarfs the true church. Protestants might be able to argue that case by labeling it the whore of Babylon and attributing all kinds of evil doctrine to it, but that argument would not work for the Orthodox, who are in near total agreement with Catholic doctrine. So, without the Pope, they haven't been able to call an ecumenical council since the Great Schism. They're a bunch of fractured little churches spread out all over the Eastern world, Greek and Russian, and down through Africa. And they held to the primacy of Peter before the Great Schism, and they would do well to come back in union with us. And certainly we could use their traditionalism, their passion, and their fervency to help us re-energize the Catholic Church and bring it back to full glory. As Pope John Paul II said, the Church needs both East and West lungs to breathe.